I'm going to go over a quick download and run an overview of the VLM Caption app. Let's start with just install of the application itself. First, we're going to go to Actions and on the GitHub page, and we're going to click on the topmost entry here that has a green check mark. If for some reason one has a red check mark, like some of those, then you won't be able to use that one. But click on the first one that you see has a green check mark regardless of what the comment says. This is just going to take you to the most working recent build. We'll scroll down a little bit and look for this artifacts section. And then this link here that says VLM Caption is going to actually prompt you to download the zip file. So I'm just going to go ahead and download the zip file. And we'll give that a moment to download. See, here's my downloads, and then there's the zip file. If I just, I have 7-zip, so I'm just going to use 7-zip to say extract here. Actually, let me scroll up a little bit, 7-zip, and just extract it a little bit more. 7-zip, extract here, or you just need to unzip the file. Hopefully you can figure that out. This is it. You're installed for the application. This mainly what you're going to be doing is editing this file called caption.yaml. Let me try that again. Here we go. So if I open this up in Notepad++, this is all the configuration that you need. You'll need, we'll go through how to install an LM service in a second, but for now, if you have a local LLM, you're going to paste in the service. You don't worry about these API key environments or key environment vars. These are for if you're using OpenAI or Anthropic or whatnot. You'll use those for the API key down here. You'll also need to eventually decide what model you want to use, and you'll just paste in the model string here. You will write a system prompt here. If you have a global metadata file that is going to be information about all of the images that you might be captioning, you can put those in here. There's a character info.txt. It's actually included here. This character info.txt is what I created for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I took a bunch of screenshots of the video game, and then I wrote a document in this character info.txt that has a whole bunch of information about all of the characters in the game. And you can see what I wrote here. I wrote a nice big document about all the stuff in the game. And that is just an idea. It's one thing you can do. And if you have the inkling to do that, if you don't, you can just remove it. And then we will configure prompts. And these prompts, the whole idea of this application is that we send these prompts one at a time along with the previous chat history from the previous prompt into the VLM, and then we ask it at the end to finalize and give a summary. But you can change these. And all you do is you put a dash, you just make sure these are indented, you put a dash, and then you put a prompt. And then you can add as many of these as you want. I don't recommend more than a few. Here I've got 4. 4 to 5 is pretty good if you're using a good VLM model. Some you might not be able to do that. You might need only 1 or 2, but you'll have to work on that. That's something for you to figure out depending on your model, depending on your data, depending on if you've given it one of these documents or not. You can work on tuning this in the series of prompts. Hint sources here are specialized extra info that will get read from the file system. This one, full path, will actually just put the path of the file name. So every time it goes through an image and picks up an image, it will put the file name, the whole entire path of the file name. So if your data is organized, like you've put each character of whatever you're captioning in subdirectories, like you put Cloud Strife in one subdirectory and Aerith Gainsborough in another directory, and for instance, like I've set my data up here on my R drive under the games Rebirth screenshots SDR. So if I had then put more subdirectories under this location for each character, then this full path will actually provide that information. And even though it also includes this r/game/rebirth screenshots, the VLMs are smart enough to understand that this part isn't very important, but then if there's also a Cloud Strife subfolder, then um, that will it will be a good hint, and it will figure that out. There's also JSON, and this is to have the app attempt to load a .json file that is sitting next to the image. So if I have cloudstrife.jpg, if there is a cloudstrife.json file in the same directory, it will read that and include it. And also then there's this metadata, which is a folder based. So if there's a metadata.json in a folder that is specific to the information in that folder, so if you have 10 pictures of Cloud Strife and I have a metadata.json file in my Cloud Strife directory, like subdirectory, then that would be a useful thing to use. If the JSON file or the metadata file aren't present, these just get skipped. Full path is always going to be valid. So that's the basics of the app. There is a prerequisite here, though, before we get started with the app. It's not completely self-contained. It's mostly self-contained with this exe file here, this caption openai.exe. You will need to install a service. And what I recommend is LM Studio. If you go to lmstudio.ai, if I click on the right thing here, you can just download LM Studio for Windows. This is super easy to install, and this will create, this is a very easy way for you to run a hosted API on your own computer or on your own local network. So this is what I recommend. You can use Ollama, VLLM, or any other common, if you're already familiar with another local host, you can do that, but LM Studio is probably the easiest for people because you just click on this download, you run through the installer, and you're pretty much done. We will need to do a little bit of configuration in LM Studio, so I'm going to go through LM Studio. I will assume if you're using Ollama or VLLM or something else, you just kind of know what you're doing. So I'll actually close this for now. So when we've got LM Studio open, what we actually want to do is go to Discover. Actually, first let's do the developer setup. You want to make sure you're either on power user or developer setting down here at the bottom, and then you should see this developer tab here on the left. So when you click on the developer tab, you can start a hosted service, a local service, just by clicking this little toggle button here. And then also when you toggle that on, you're going to get an IP address and port number, and you're going to want to click that, this little copy icon, and then that is what you're going to paste in for your base URL. So I will paste that in here, but I'm going to leave the /v1 because that is likely required. And then now you're pointing to your own computer. The second part we need to do is decide what model we want to use. Oops, I did not mean to move all that, but that's fine. Here I've got my system currently configured to use Llama 4 Scout, which is probably too big for most people to use. So what I'll first do is show you how to select a model in LM Studio. We'll go to Discover tab. Oops, okay, yeah, you can see that. So if I go here to the Discover tab, I'm going to look for Gemma 27B. And you want to make sure that you get one that says that it's vision enabled. It has this little vision icon. And I'm actually going to, and there's a couple different versions of this. I am actually not going to go with the very top one that is suggested. I'm going to scroll down until I see the unsloth one. Here's the unsloth one. And then this one gives me some more options of versions I want to download. And this is where you can choose. If I move this over just a little bit, you can choose one that will fit. Gemma 327B is a really good model, and in Q4, if we use like Q4KM or Q4KS quants, you can see the file is 17 or 18 gigabytes. They've got a little thumbs up here. This is the one that people suggest. 17 gigabytes is good size if you have a 24 gigabyte graphics card. There are a bunch of other models. You can pick pretty much anything. I know the Intern VL, I think, is one that people like. There's some really small ones. Here's Intern VL 38B, provided by GGML, and they also offer a couple different options. You can, if you have a 16 gigabyte card, you can even use the Q8 quant. But like I said, this is a subject for another day. But nevertheless, if I type in Gemma 27B and I scroll down to Unsloth, I've actually already downloaded the Q8KXL, which is 33 gigabytes because I have a whole lot of VRAM. But Q5, Q4, these are still really good models. So what you want to do is just select one of these and then click the download button and let that download. And then what we will do is then if we look at my models, we need to get, after it's downloaded, we go to my models. And what I need to get is the model string. So you can see here it's just called Gemma-3-27B after I've downloaded it. And that is what I'm going to paste into caption.yaml. In fact, I've already got it here in a comment, so I'm just going to copy that, paste it in here, and now I'll use Gemma-3-27B. It's on LM Studio. I've got my IP address port and the /v1 here in base URL, and then back in this app I've got the service running, so that's pretty much all you need to do. If we go back here, my caption.yaml, let's pretend I've already gone through this and configured it. So all you need to do then is you just double click on the exe file, and there you go. It's going to start running. So I've got a whole bunch of screenshots of the game here in this folder, and at the very beginning it's going to show me my system prompt, and then as it goes through it's only going to list out the final caption, but it will continue to process this. And again, it also will show you where it's saving the files. That's pretty much it. Once you've got LM Studio or whatever host you want to use configured, this is really easy to use. It's self-contained. You just have this zip file that you download from the GitHub repo, this VLM Caption.zip. You unzip it and then you just run the exe. This is Apache open source code, so you're welcome to look at the code. If you don't trust the exe, you can also clone the repo and run it directly that way with Python. But this actually, the action runs in GitHub and the code's there if you're nervous about running an exe file. That's pretty much it. I would very much encourage you, as you experiment with this code, to try considering using a global metadata file like this and write kind of a codex of information about the general subject matter and things like how to identify the characters. If I go back and I open up this file, I've got detailed physical descriptions of all the characters in the game. Even sometimes they have different outfits. Yada yada yada. I've got a whole bunch of information here. I've even got Cloud takes Steve on a date in there. There's a Loveless opera. There's events of note here. I've got some fun things that happen in the game. I have some information about shot scales and shot angles that might be in there that might be useful if you want the VLM to caption, if you kind of tell a little bit about how you want things to be captioned. You could also take this entire document if you wanted and just paste it into the system prompt or the first prompt, and it will likely have the same effect. It's just that once this file becomes so large, once I've got, this is something like a little over 3,000 tokens that I wrote up, it becomes awkward. The only reason I do that mainly is that pasting a 3,000 token set of information here in the system prompt or in this first prompt field would just be awkward, and that's why there's this global metadata field. But I would play with this. I would play with how you set up your prompts. You can also see, if you actually look here, I've got a little bit of logging. These messages 0, 1, and 2, and potentially 3, 4, and so forth. What it's actually doing, it's dumping the raw output of the chat into, this is the actual Open API interactions are actually dumped in here. Unfortunately, the first thing you're going to see is a giant hairball mess of where the image is. This is a base 64. That's the image file right there. But if we scroll down, you can see here's the actual text um, text responses. So here's the first assistant response. That's the AI, and then here's the second follow-up prompt where I ask it a little bit more, like try to identify the characters, and then it responds based on the image descriptions, yada yada yada. It says, okay, this is Cloud Strife because he's got spiky blonde hair. And then I ask it again. Here's my next prompt. Describe the framing and composition, shot type and shot angle. And again, this is just from right here. This is just the next one. It just reloaded, but and then the final one is to finalize and summarize. And then you can see here this is the final one from the last one. Now, our last interaction. This final interaction is what becomes the caption. These files right here are only created as overwritten on every single file, but so it's just really more of a quick debug. It's not meant to be a complete log transcription of every single interaction, but it's just useful for troubleshooting if you're trying to find out what is it saying in between, like what are the intermediate responses to these middle prompts, right? So these middle prompts, you're only ever going to see this output onto the console output because that's the final caption. It's just going to be this part, the response to your final caption. But if you want to see the whole chat interaction, you can also look at the that's not what I wanted. You can also look at these messages files. That's pretty much it. Hopefully that's enough to get everybody started with this application. I decided to go with using a prefab host like LM Studio or whatever Open API compatible host you can. Just because this says Open Caption OpenAI.exe, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with OpenAI. OpenAI API is a generic way for applications to talk to each other. Right now, none of this information is going over the internet. Um, so when I say OpenAI in any of this code, it is purely because the OpenAI API is the standard protocol for everyone that everyone uses. So LM Studio uses it. Even though this is running completely on my computer, it doesn't talk to OpenAI. Sam Altman is not looking at your responses. But so just to clear that up, so you can just run on a local host. If you do want to use, maybe briefly, that's pretty much it. And I will include briefly if you do want to use a paid API, what you'll do is you'll paste in those, you'll paste in the API endpoint to either OpenAI or Anthropic or OpenRouter or whatever you want, and then you can, what you'll do is say, let's say that I was going to use OpenAI. I put in the OpenAI endpoint in here, which I don't have readily to copy and paste, but you put that there. You put in OpenAI API key in here, and it's actually going to read this from your environment variable. Or you could paste in your actual OpenAPI key in here if you wanted. I don't recommend that. You should use environment variables. And then you would change this to something like, I think it's Chat GPT 4.0, uh, 03 03 or whatever. You need to go and figure that out, and I'm not going to get too much into that. There's more information in the document, and I did not prepare that. Oh, here you go. GPT 4.0 mini. You'd paste that in. I do have one of those strings in here. And, oh, here's like, here we go. I do have it in here. So there's the OpenAI endpoint. Let's say I want to use 4.0 mini. I think that's got images in it, and then I put OpenAI API key in here, and then I'd go set this in my environment. You can open up environment variables in Windows or use the set command on the command line. Read the documentation for more information on that. That's pretty much it. Hopefully that's enough to get people started and make it as easy as possible by just using one of these prefab hosts. And then finally, the last reason that I used a prefab host is that a lot of these models that you go out here and use, they're kind of like somewhat incompatible. It's really hard to get these hosted under a compatible interface unless you're using somebody that's already written a server for you. But most of these, LM Studio will load any GGUF models and other models, Olama, VLM. I'm sure there's other hosting platform, hosting apps, services that you can use, and they kind of alleviate a lot of the dependency hell for the developer when I just want an app that is focused on this kind of workflow. So that's pretty much it. I will stop here, and if you have any questions, I would hop on the Discord, and that's the best place to ask.